My name is Xyler, and I am a chronicler of the Cathar Hive Dominion. My carapace is the color of polished obsidian, a sign of my youth and clerical caste, and my 6 limbs are trained for the delicate manipulation of data crystals, not the cleaving of flesh. Yet I know war. Every Cathar knows war. It is etched into our genetic memory, a sonorous hum that underlies the frantic buzzing of our hives. War is the fire in which our hives are forged, the pressure that turns common purpose into the diamond of unity. It is an honorable, necessary, and, in its own structured way, beautiful crucible. This was the understanding I carried with me to the galactic nexus. A breathtaking spindle of spun metal and crystalline habitats orbiting a placid G-type star named Sol by its local sentience. The nexus was a monument to the ideals of the new galactic concordiat, a place for cultural exchange, for the untangling of old prejudices and the weaving of new alliances. I was part of the third Cathar delegation, chosen for my knowledge of martial histories. My purpose was to share the glorious chronicles of the Hive Wars and to learn the ways of others. The chamber designated for these exchanges was called the Hall of Martial Legacy, a name that sang to my soul. It was a vast, circular room with a domed ceiling displaying a real-time star map of the galaxy. Representatives from a dozen species sat on environment-specific platforms arranged in a wide circle. The air was a carefully filtered cocktail of atmospheric compounds, a testament to the station's technological prowess, yet the distinct sense of the attendees bled through. The dry, dusty smell of the silicon-based glyptons, the sharp tang of ozone from the SHRA's electrostatic cloaks, the musky, feral scent of the Vex. We began as all such conclaves do, with ceremony and posturing. Then the sharing began. Borog, the Glypton elder, spoke first. His voice was the sound of tectonic plates grinding together, a slow, patient resonance that demanded silence. Glyptons are beings of living stone, their lifespans measured in millennia. Their wars, he explained, were contests of geological patience. The War of the Crimson Plains, Borog rumbled, his crystalline facets catching the starlight from the dome above, lasted for 7,000 of your solar cycles. The usurper hives of Nice sought to claim the silicatrich fields of our basaltic brethren. We did not send armies. We did not fire weapons. We simply advanced. We extended our geological roots, 1 millimeter per cycle, absorbing their territory, converting their very ground into our own substance. They retaliated in kind. It was a war of growth, of inexorable pressure. Entire generations lived and died knowing only the slow, grinding advance. In the end, our foundational resonance proved stronger. They crumbled, not into dust but into a new stratum of our own world. A beautiful, tragic layer in our history. He spoke with a deep, sonorous pride. His people's warfare was a testament to their greatest virtues, patience, endurance, and an unbreakable connection to their world. Next came Zephyrwing of the SHRA, a magnificent avian creature with feathers like spun moonlight and a crest that shimmered with biotic electricity. The SHRA were artists of conflict. Glory to the Concordiat, she chirped, her voice a series of melodic trills. I shall tell you of the dance of 1,000 suns, when the Cygnian flock dared to challenge our claim to the gas giant Yathira and its shimmering rings. We did not engage in vulgar slaughter. Such is not the SHRA way. Our sky princes met their champions in the upper atmosphere. It was a ballet of plasma cannons and gravitic maneuvering, a spectacle for all to see. The goal was not to kill, but to disable. To sever a wing actuator with a perfectly aimed shot. To force an opponent into a graceful but irreversible spin. To paint their shields with such a dazzling display of energy that their sensors overloaded. The flock whose champions were all grounded first would cede the territory. It was beautiful, a performance of skill and daring that strengthened the spirit of both our peoples. The Cygnians are our closest allies now, for they saw the artistry of their defeat and respected our mastery. She preened, her pride a palpable aura. Her people fought for glory, for status, for the sheer aesthetic beauty of perfectly executed combat. War was their highest form of artistic expression. Then came Grorn, the Vex chieftain, a mountain of muscle, fur, and tusks. The Vex were the galaxy's boogeymen, pragmatic and brutal conquerors. His voice was a guttural roar, softened just enough to be understood through the universal translator. Patience. He spat the words like curses. War is about strength. It is about bending the weak to the will of the strong. When we decided the Kelthari homeworld's mineral wealth was necessary for the expansion of the Vex Imperium, we did not dance. We did not wait. We blockaded their world and gave them a choice: subjugation or starvation. They resisted. Foolishly, Grorn's tusks, intricately carved with battle scenes, gleamed. Our harrowing was swift. We broke their fleets, shattered their planetary defenses, and landed our shock troops. We razed their capital city, a lesson to the others. We did not wipe them out. Why destroy a useful tool? The Kelthari now mine their own planet for our benefit. Their leaders serve as my attendants. Their warriors form our vanguard legions. We broke their pride, and in its place we gave them purpose, to serve the Vex. It was not pretty. It was necessary. War is the engine of galactic order, and the strong are its engineers. He slammed a massive fist on his platform, a gesture of finality and absolute conviction. The Vex fought for resources and dominance. Their wars were bloody but logical. Annihilation was wasteful. Finally, it was my turn. I rose on my 4 lower limbs, my 2 upper limbs crossed over my thorax in a gesture of respect. I spoke of the great hive wars of Cathar, of how 2 hives would declare formal war and send their champions into a designated valley. The combat was fierce, a whirlwind of claws and acid spit, but governed by ancient rituals. The victor's hive would absorb the losers, not as slaves, but as new members of the collective, strengthening the whole. I spoke of the individual honor of the champions and the collective glory of the unified hive. Our wars were about unity, about proving the fitness of one collective ideology over another, and ultimately about creating a stronger, more resilient whole. Throughout these retellings, my optical sensors kept drifting to the 2 representatives from the species called human. They were from the star system we were currently orbiting, the newcomers to the galactic stage, having only been discovered a mere 50 cycles ago. They looked so soft, bipedal with fleshy, unprotected skin, minimal natural weaponry, and expressive, mobile faces. Their names were Alara Vance and Marcus Thorne. She was a historian, he a diplomat. They listened with an unnerving stillness. While Borog spoke, they seemed to be calculating geological timelines in their heads. During Zephyrwing's tale, their eyes followed the phantom ships in the air, their expressions not of awe, but of critical analysis. When Grorn boasted of the harrowing, a flicker of something, disgust, pity, crossed Alara's face before it was replaced by a mask of polite neutrality. And while I spoke, they looked at me with what I could only describe as a kind of gentle sadness. They said nothing. They offered no stories of their own. This silence did not go unnoticed. During a refreshment break, Zephyrwing fluttered near me, her crest pulsing with curiosity. The pink skins are quiet, are they not, Chronicler Xyler? Do they have no history of glory? Perhaps they are a species of pure pacifists. Unlikely, Grorn's voice boomed from behind us. He had approached, his massive form eclipsing the starlight. No species reaches orbit without conflict. It is the law of nature. They are hiding something. They are ashamed of their weakness. I considered this. Humans were physically unimposing. Perhaps their wars were small, squalid affairs they were embarrassed to share in the company of glyptonic patience, Satra artistry, and Vex might. It seemed a plausible explanation. They were newcomers, after all, feeling out their place. The next day the topic arose again in a less formal setting. We were gathered in a common lounge, a space with panoramic views of the planet below, a swirling marble of blue, white, and green. It was a beautiful world, teeming with a staggering diversity of life, according to the briefing data. Grorn, ever the diplomat of a sledgehammer, decided to force the issue. He lumbered over to the human delegation who were quietly observing the planet. "Human," he grunted, addressing Marcus. "We have shared our souls, our histories of fire and blood. You have shared nothing. Does your species lack the spine for war? Do you simply surrender when a stronger will imposes itself?" Marcus Thorne offered a tight, polite smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "Our history is complicated, Chieftain Grorn. War is not something we celebrate," Grorn scoffed. "It is not about celebration. It is about existence. It is the sharpening of the species. To deny your martial history is to deny the very process that made you what you are. All eyes in the room were now on the two humans. Alara Vance sighed, a small, weary sound. She turned from the viewport, her gaze sweeping over the assembled aliens. Her eyes were a pale gray, like a winter sky, and they seemed to hold an ancient exhaustion. "You misunderstand, chieftain," she said, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the low hum of the lounge. "We don't deny our history, we just don't take pride in it." Zephyrwing trilled, a sound of confusion. "But why? Is there no honor, no glory?" Alara looked at the avian, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "There is honor, yes, and moments of what some might call glory, but they are buried under mountains of things we would rather forget." The pressure was immense now. The silence in the room was a physical weight. We were all leaning in, a council of warrior cultures judging the silent newcomers. I felt a pang of what I thought was pity for them. They were being bullied into revealing their inadequacies. Marcus glanced at Alara, a silent conversation passing between them. She gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. He turned back to the room. "All right, you want a story." His voice was resigned, but it was Alara who spoke. "I won't tell you a story of a great war," she began, her voice holding the quiet authority of a scholar. "I won't speak of grand armies or fleets clashing among the stars, because our most defining conflicts happened before we ever left our cradle, before we met any of you." She paused, letting that sink in. "There was a time, not so long ago in our history, when our world was divided into two vast, competing ideologies. Let us call them the Coalition and the Alliance. They had fought for decades, a grinding war of attrition that cost millions of lives and vast resources. But they had reached a stalemate, a terrifying equilibrium. Both sides had developed weapons of such power that their use by one would guarantee a retaliatory strike from the other, resulting in the annihilation of both. The Glypton shifted his stony mass. A war of mutual deterrence, a logical if unstable endpoint for escalating arms. "Exactly," Alara affirmed. But the war continued in other ways: proxies, economics, espionage. The stalemate was chafing, and the desire for a decisive end grew. The strategists on both sides began to think beyond conventional warfare. They began to explore theoretical options. Her voice dropped a little, becoming more clinical, more detached. It was the tone of a biologist describing a virus. The Alliance's scientific directorate drafted a plan codenamed Prometheus Unbound. It involved the creation of a tailored nanophage, an airborne microscopic machine that would target a specific genetic marker present in over 97% of the Coalition's population. It wouldn't kill them. It would simply rewrite a single sequence in their reproductive DNA, rendering them sterile. Within one generation, the Coalition would cease to exist. No mass graves, no radioactive craters. Just a quiet, gentle fading away. A genocide so clean you could write poetry about it. A chill, utterly alien to my Cathar physiology, traced its way up my spinal nerve cluster. Zephyrwing's feathers ruffled, a sign of extreme distress. Grorn's perpetual sneer had vanished, replaced by a look of stony confusion. Alara continued, her gaze distant, as if she were reading from a scroll only she could see. The Coalition, in turn, had its own projects. One was a gray goo scenario, a self-replicating swarm that would consume all inorganic material in their enemy's territory, turning their cities and infrastructure to dust. But their ultimate contingency, if they faced imminent defeat, was a protocol named Scorched Sky. It wasn't a weapon aimed at the Alliance. It was aimed at our world. She gestured towards the beautiful blue-green sphere hanging in the viewport. It was a network of cobalt-salted thermonuclear devices, buried deep within their own continental plates and seated in the upper atmosphere. If their command structure was broken and defeat was certain, the protocol would trigger automatically. The resulting global radiation bath would alter the planet's atmosphere and soil chemistry so profoundly that it would be lethal to all complex terrestrial life for the next 50,000 years. It would not just kill the Alliance. It would kill us. It would kill our entire species. It would kill our world. The strategic thinking was that if the Coalition could not have the world, then no one could. Victory was defined not as their survival, but as the absolute, unconditional, and permanent loss of their enemy. Hall was utterly silent. The low hum of the station's life support seemed deafening. I looked around at the other delegates. Borog's facets were dark, his inner light dimmed. Zephyrwing was trembling, her beautiful crest drooping. Grorn, the mighty Vex chieftain who spoke of subjugation and breaking the will of the weak, looked small. He looked horrified. We, the warrior peoples of the galaxy, had shared our tales of honor, patience, art, and brutal pragmatism. The Cathar fought for the collective, the Satra for glory, the Glyptons for land, the Vex for chattel. We all fought for something to gain. The humans had just described a strategy based on the principle of ensuring there was nothing left to gain. A strategy where the definition of victory was a universe without either victor or vanquished. It was a form of logic so alien, so utterly outside our comprehension of conflict, that it felt like a blasphemy against the very concept of life. Ilara's gaze returned to the room, and there was a profound sadness in her eyes. In the end, we did neither. Cooler heads prevailed. We found another way, a long and difficult path to peace, but the plans were made. The weapons were designed, the calculations were run. The logic was deemed sound by the people in charge of making those decisions. We looked into the abyss, and the abyss looked back, and we saw our own face in it. She took a small breath and delivered the final lines, not as a boast, not as a threat, but as a simple, devastating statement of fact. A confession. We don't like war. We find no glory in it, we take no pride in it, but we're very, very good at it. Silence that followed was a living thing. It was heavier than a collapsed star. Marcus Thorne put a gentle hand on Ilara's shoulder, his expression one of deep sorrow. The exchange was over. People began to drift away, not speaking, not making eye contact. Grorn left without a word. Zephyrwing practically fled. Borog sat unmoving for a long time before slowly retracting into a more compact, defensive posture. I returned to my sterile, hexagonal quarters. The filtered air felt thin, suffocating. The quiet hum of the station, once a comforting sound of order, now sounded like the whine of a machine waiting for an activation code. I tried to follow my nightly ritual. I unhooked the clasps on my thorax plate and began to polish the obsidian surface with a silk cloth, a meditative act meant to calm the hive mind static within me. But my limbs trembled. My focus was gone. I kept seeing the image Ilara had painted. A silent, sterile genocide. A planet deliberately poisoned by its own children. I lay on my resting slab, but sleep would not come. The darkness of my chamber was not empty. It was filled with ghosts. The ghosts of humanity's theoretical victims. Why was this so much more terrifying than Grorn's harrowing? The Vex were brutal, but their brutality was comprehensible. They killed to enforce their will to take resources. Their violence had a purpose, an end goal that served their species. It was the logic of a predator. A wolf kills a caribou to feed its pack. It does not devise a plan to make all caribou sterile for all time. It does not rig its own forest to burn to the ground if it loses a fight with a rival pack. The Vex logic was brutal, but it was alive. It was part of the cycle. The human logic, it was something else entirely. It was the logic of a virus, of a mathematical equation solving for zero. It was a complete and total detachment from the sanctity of life, from the continuation of the cycle. They had turned warfare, the ultimate expression of a species' will to survive, into an abstract problem of absolute elimination. I began to connect this revelation with everything else I knew about them. Their incredible adaptability. They had evolved on a world with crushing gravity, extreme weather, and constant competition. A death world by galactic standards. Most species evolve in a niche and master it. Humans had evolved to master every niche. Their defining trait was not strength or speed, but a relentless, creative problem-solving intelligence. And I realized, with a cold dread that settled deep in my core, that they applied that same intelligence to everything. To art, to science, to diplomacy, and to war. When a Cathar faces a problem, we ask, how does the hive solve this? When a Satra faces a problem, they ask, how can this be solved with elegance? When a Vex faces a problem, they ask, how can this be broken to my will? When a human faces a problem, they seem to ask, what is the most efficient way to ensure this is no longer a problem? And if the problem is another sentient species, their definition of efficient has no floor. The quote replayed in my mind. "We don't like war, but we're very, very good at it." It wasn't a boast about their skill with weapons. It was a statement about their nature. Their goodness at war wasn't in their strength or technology, but in their horrifying capacity for a certain kind of thought. The ability to look at their own extinction and see it as a viable strategic tool. Who else could do that? Who else would even think to do that? I tried to imagine a Cathar hive master suggesting we poison our own birthing chambers to spite a rival hive. He would be torn apart before the sentence was finished. It was unthinkable. It was a violation of the primary directive. The hive must endure. The humans had a different primary directive, it seemed. Or perhaps no directive at all beyond solving the puzzle in front of them. Their empathy, which I had first mistaken for weakness, now seemed like the most important thing in the galaxy. It wasn't a flaw, it was a safety protocol. It was the thin, fragile barrier holding back a flood of cold, terrifying, remorseless logic. Ilara's sadness wasn't for the wars they had fought, it was for the wars they were capable of fighting. The ghosts that haunted her were not from the past. They were from the futures they had narrowly avoided. Futures they had meticulously planned. I rose from my slab and moved to my own viewport. Below me, Earth continued its silent, graceful turn. The swirling clouds, the deep blue oceans, the patches of green land. It looked like a paradise, a cradle of life, but now I saw it differently. It was not a cradle, it was a crucible. It was a cage where a uniquely intelligent and terrifying predator had been forged. And now, the cage was open. The stars in the dome of the Hall of Martial Legacy had looked like points of light, destinations of honor and glory. Now, as I stared out into the true abyss, they looked like hiding places. I felt a profound, instinctual fear I had never known. It was not the fear of a warrior facing an honorable foe. It was the fear of a herbivore that has just realized the quiet, soft-footed creature it has been sharing a meadow with is not another grazer. The sun of this system would soon rise, its light touching the station. But for me, the galaxy had just grown infinitely darker. And I knew with absolute certainty that I would not be sleeping tonight. Or perhaps ever again without seeing the ghosts of the wars that humanity, in its quiet, apologetic, and terrifying brilliance, had chosen not to fight. The question that would keep me awake for the rest of my life was a simple one. Under what circumstances might they choose differently? And would there be anyone left to chronicle it?